starting at 0, what is the value of sine at 0 degrees? Yeah, it's 0. What is the value of sine at pi over 2? So now we've gone from 0 to pi over 2, haven't we? So what is the value of sine at pi over 2? Okay. Now we're going around to pi over 2, aren't we? I'm trying to picture this in my head. So for you, it would have been starting at 0, pi over 2, pi. So we're now at pi. What's the value of sine at pi? 0. Okay, now we're at the bottom. What's the value of sine at 3 pi over 2? -1. And now we're back to where we started. So what's the value of sine?
0.
Okay, so now negative angles simply mean we start and go the other way around. So if we start at 0 and we go the other way around, negative pi over 2 is the same as positive 3 pi over 2, isn't it? So what is the value there? Value of sine going around the other way, -1. Do you see a pattern starting? Look at this side. 0, -1, 0, 1, 0, -1. Can you pick up the pattern again? 1, 0, right? So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually plot this. Now, a couple things I want you to know is this right here in yellow represents 1 period. In other words, it represents how long it takes for this thing to start and go through 1 cycle. Okay? So at 0, this thing is 0. Do you agree? At pi over 2, notice my graph. If you'll notice, your graph is done in pi over 4s. This is pi over 2 right here. So pi over 4, pi over 2, 3 pi over 4, pi, and so on. And then 3 pi over 2. So every 2 spaces is one of the tick marks on your unit circle, isn't it? Do you get it? So at 0, and we'll say this is 1, and this is -1. So at 0, this thing is 0. At pi over 2, where are we? We're at 1. Now at pi, we're back to what? At 3 pi over 2, we're down to -1, and then back at 2 pi, we're at 0 again. All right, that's 1 period. Now we could go the other way. We could go backwards. At negative pi over 2, we are at, and then at negative pi, we go to 0, don't we? And then at -3 pi over 2, we're at 1. And then at -2 pi, we are back to, do you see what's going to happen here? From here, it's going to curve. This is not straight. These are not zigzags. They are curves. We're going to curve up and then down, keep going down. And then we're going to go up again this way. And then we're going to continue that curve on the other side. I want you to think about the fact that we've now really, what we've done basically is uncurled the unit circle. Think about it. The unit circle for sine looks like this, doesn't it? Basically, all I have done is taken this bottom chunk and uncurled it. Doesn't that look like a sine curve? Yeah, it does, doesn't it? So that's what's happened, is instead of going around in a circle, we've gone linearly, which makes the bottom, this bottom chunk, end up over here. Okay? All right, 1 period, if we look at the 1 period thing again, 1 period is here. In other words, it took it how long to get all the way through 1 cycle and back to where it started again? 2 pi. Okay. So let's talk about domain and range and all that fun stuff. What is the domain of this guy? All real numbers. Yes, it's got arrows at both ends, doesn't it? What is the range, though? What's the lowest value we get? And what's the highest? That must be the range then, right? So the range is from -1 to 1. Does this thing have symmetry? X-axis, Y-axis, origin? It doesn't have X-axis, does it? Clearly. Does it have Y-axis? No. Does it have symmetry? In other words, if we rotated it 180 degrees, would it rotate onto itself again? Think about it. if you took this and rotated it over, what does it look like? It looks like that, doesn't it? So does this thing rotate 180 degrees? It does, doesn't it? So it has origin symmetry. Now, what did we say the period was? 2 pi. Now, the intercepts. Where's the y-intercept? It's 0, isn't it? Now, x-intercept. There's more than one, isn't there? As a matter of fact, x-intercept happens at negative 2 pi, negative pi, 0, pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, 5 pi, and so on. As a matter of fact, that's every multiple of pi. So we write that as this, n pi. Remember that? So the x-intercepts are at every pi. N pi, where n is an element of the integers. Remember that? We talked about this at the very beginning. We've done this. It's bringing some stuff back from first semester, isn't it? About signing. Extrema. Does it have maximums? Yeah, it has a bunch of them, doesn't it? The maxes are all at multiples of what? Pi over 2. 3 pi over 2. As a matter of fact, how far is it from pi over 2 from between these two? How many spaces is that? Let's count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Right? Now I want you to see something. If I count between 0 and 2 pi, how many spaces is that? 8. So every time we hit another maximum, we go 8 spaces, don't we? 8 spaces is equivalent to 2 pi. So every 2 pi, starting at pi over 2, every 2 pi, we hit another maximum, don't we? The first maximum's at pi over 2, and then every one after that. Does that make sense? Every chunk of 2 pi, every 8 spaces. So how do we write that? We start where the first one is. Notice that pi over 2 is where the first one is. And then by saying 2 pi n, we're saying go multiples of 8 spaces to get to the next ones, forward or backwards, right? Where n is an element of what? The integers. Okay? Now, is this guy continuous? Could you trace this whole thing without ever picking up your pencil? Yeah. So is it continuous? Yes. Over what interval? How do we say everywhere? From where to where? You're on the right track. From negative infinity to infinity. Now, end behavior is a weird one. Because what do you see this thing doing? It's bouncing back and forth, isn't it? That's called oscillating. Between what two numbers? Negative 1 and 1. So the end behavior is it oscillates between negative 1 and 1. Okay? So do we understand sine? Now, there are some things that I want you to look at for sine. Things that you should see. Sine starts at the middle, doesn't it? Right here at the beginning of the period, this is the middle. Then it does what? Goes high, goes back to the middle, goes low, and then goes back to the middle. Middle, high, middle, low, middle. Remember that. That's helpful. Okay? Everybody good? So let's look at cosine now. So looking at that same unit circle, let's start with 0 and make our way around. At 0, what is cosine? 1. At pi over 2, what is cosine? At pi, what is cosine? 3 pi over 2? 2 pi? Well, 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1. Guess what? Going to keep following that, isn't it? Now, this isn't exactly the same as the other one. If you'll notice, though, it's only off by how many spaces? It's off. It's shifted off by one space, isn't it? So do you understand that cosine is going to look a lot like sine, except it's going to be shifted one way by pi over 2. That's basically one of these spaces, isn't it? So let's draw this in. At 0, we are now at 1. At pi over 2, we are at 0. At pi, we are -1. 3 pi over 2, we are at 0. And then at 2 pi, we are at 1. And then we go back the other direction, don't we? 0, -1. Oops, sorry. I got ahead of myself. 0, -1. 0 and 1, right? So look how this guy looks. All right, so what's the domain? Let's talk about what one period would be of this guy. One period, again, to go from the beginning to where it begins to repeat itself is how far? 2 pi, isn't it? So the period is 2 pi again. What's the domain? All real numbers. What's the range? What's the highest value? What's the lowest y value that you see? -1 to 1 again. Does it have symmetry? What kind of symmetry does it have? Yep, it has y-axis. You are correct. You fold it along the y-axis, it'll fold onto itself this time, won't it? Intercepts. Where is the y-intercept? It's at 1. Yep. X-intercepts. X-intercepts are every multiple of what? Pi over 2. So we do pi n over 2, where n is an element of the integers. Continuity. Is this thing continuous? Yes. Over what interval? Yep, -infinity to infinity. And behavior. What do we notice about this guy as well as with sine? Oscillates. Between -1 and 1. Okay. So do you feel like you can identify all of the pieces here? All right, we are going to treat this just like we do anything else. We're going to treat it like having to graph these things. We're going to look at the basic graph we did. That's the parent graph. In other words, the parent graph for this would be y equals cosine x. The parent graph for sine would be y equals sine x. Okay? And then we're going to look at the transformations. Forgot there's a bottom part to this, isn't there? Here we go. Transformations. The proper form for both of these would be for sine, it would be y equals a sine of bx minus c plus d. This would be like a, b, h, and k, wouldn't it? Just c and d are h and k. Or for cosine, y equals a cosine of bx minus c plus d. So this is how you graph sine and cosine. You're going to first list a, b, c, and d. That is the first step, okay? Now, I made you a for a, let's say for cosine, this point right here is our normal, where the midline is. Midline is the middle, okay? A cosine function window, and I've got the window outlined in yellow. This is the window for a cosine function normally. Cosine function normally starts, the midline in the window normally starts at the point 0, 0, doesn't it? So if we have a left-right shift and an up-down shift, the left-right shift is the c over b, the up-down shift is the d. Do you see why now I say is this? Do you know, remember when we marked sine? This guy starts high, doesn't it? Goes to the middle, goes low, goes to the middle, and goes high. So what you have to remember is sine starts in the middle and goes high. Cosine starts high and goes to the middle. So you'll hear me say a lot, okay, we're graphing sine, so what does it do? Where does it start? And I'll be wanting you to say it starts in the middle. And if I say cosine, you're going to want to know that it starts high usually, right? Now what happens if there's a negative in front of the A? What does a negative in front of that usually imply? It's flipped, isn't it? So instead, if this were negative cosine, instead of starting high and going to the middle, it would flip it over. So where would it start instead? Low to the middle, then high. And if you're starting with sine, sine would still start at the middle, but instead of starting middle and going high, it would start at the middle and go low. So it would just flip the pattern over, okay, if it's negative in the front. All right, so let's actually try graphing some of these. And so here we go, the next page for what each one of those are. Amplitude is simply the absolute value of your A. Guess what amplitude is? Amplitude is how high the function goes, its max, and how low it goes, its min. Actually, so from the center line, what we call the midline, to the peak is your amplitude, or from the center line to the valley is your amplitude, okay? In real world, in sound, that would be your volume. The bigger your amplitude, the louder the sound is. So I have low amplitude or high amplitude, okay? Big, small. All right, period. Period is how long it takes for it to repeat, okay? For sine and cosine, the period is 2 pi over the absolute value of b. Now, frequency, and the only reason I include this on here is frequency is pitch. And frequency has to do with the period. The closer together it is, the higher the pitch. The further spread apart it is, the lower the pitch. So women have vocal cords that stretch, that vibrate much more rapidly than men do. The higher your voice when you sing, and you can feel it, guys, too. You can feel it. If you put your fingers at your throat where your vocal cords are and you drop your tone, you will feel the vibrations are slower, aren't they? And if you get really high, they vibrate really, really fast. Okay, do you get it though? Now, that has something to do with that beat. The frequency has something to do with the period, so it obviously has something to do with B, but it's kind of opposite. The bigger the period is, the lower the frequency. The lower the frequency is, the slower the period is, the shorter the period is, the higher. So it's a reverse relationship, isn't it? It's an inverse relationship. In other words, frequency, which we call this script F, frequency, period, by the way, is this big T. Frequency is simply 1 over T. In other words, frequency is the absolute value of B over 2 pi. This is real world stuff here we're talking about. Sound, light, those sorts of things. Now, phase shift. Phase shift has something to do with C. Phase shift is how much off of where it normally starts that it would be. That's left and right, okay? So your phase shift is going to be your left-right shift. Phase shift is always C over B. Okay? C over B. Left, right. Vertical shift is always going to be your what? Up, down. And that's going to be D. In other words, if D is positive 1, you're shifting the entire midline up 1. If D is negative 2, you're shifting the midline down 2. The whole function will go down 2, okay? So now, we are going to use what we call the window method to graph these. It's the easiest way I know how to teach you, and it's very consistent. In other words, we're going to draw in a window on our graph of where the function should be. We're going to adjust that window according to all of these things we see up here, A, B, C, and D, okay? All right, so how? The first thing we need to do is mark where the midline and the window start. We do that by finding the point C over D and C over B. I don't know why I said D. C over B, D. Think about it. That would be left, right, up, down, wouldn't it? So basically the first thing, normally look guys, and I need to make sure you understand this. Go ahead and graph this point, figure out this point C over BD and mark that. From that point, use A. That's the absolute value of A. In other words, your amplitude up and down from the midline to start making your box. In other words, from C over D, we're going to go up A and mark it, and go down A and mark it. All right? Now we just got to figure out where the box ends. The box is going to end because the box covers one period. So we just have to go that many spaces, however much a period is, and mark where the box ends. And then we finish drawing the box in. Okay? So now, you want to divide your box up into quarters. Do you know why? Quarters? Let's look back at that cosine in just a second when y'all are finished writing. Let's go back and look at that. If you think about it, what did we say? It starts, cosine, in other words, or sine starts at the middle, goes up, goes to the middle, goes down, goes to the middle. That's 4 distinct sections, isn't it? So a quarter of the way it goes, so it starts at the middle at the beginning of the box, sine does, quarter of the way it goes up, quarter of the way it's back to the middle, quarter of the way it's down, quarter of the way it's back to the middle again, isn't it? So if we go ahead and mark our box into quarters, then all we have to do is put in our up-downs markings at the top and the bottom and the middle of the box, and then we can just connect in a curve, and then repeat another window. I always ask you to do 2 windows, 2 cycles, okay? Not 1, 2, all right? You divide your box into quarters and you mark it. Now, the big things you're talking about. All right, and then we're gonna sketch our curves, okay? So now, just remember, for a sine is typically middle, high, middle, low, middle, right? If it's negative sine, it's what? Middle, low, middle, high, middle. If it's cosine, it's high, middle, low, middle, high. And if it's negative cosine, it's what? Okay, just a little reminder for you of how we sketch our curves. Now I'm going to change this first equation because I think that one's too hard to start with. I don't know what I was thinking. So let's change this to a different function. And let's walk through the steps, okay? So I want to change this one to 1/2 sine of x minus pi over 4. And that's it. Are you good? So the first thing we need to do is list A, B, C, and D, and tell what the values are. So let's start with A. What is A here? 1/2. What is B? B would be the value in front of the x. And don't you dare say 0. Yes, B is 1. There's an implied 1 right there, isn't there? C is what? It's pi over 4. Is it negative or positive? Be careful, because remember, it comes out of the parentheses as the opposite. So it's positive pi over 4. And D is what? Is there a D at the end? So there's an implied plus 0. Good. So now, we can list the domain first, or I'm going to do all these other things as we go because I'm going to need them. Some of them to actually graph my window, aren't I? I mean, I can graph it first and then come up with all of those things if you want. So what did we say? We said the first thing I need to do is find I need to find the midline, don't I? So to graph, I'm going to find the midline. So number 1, find the midline, and the midline is C over B, D, right? So I need to take C over B. What is C over B? Pi over 4 divided by 1 is still just pi over 4. So this is going to be at pi over 4, and what was D? 0. All right, so we need to go over pi over 4 and mark pi over 4, 0. Guys, do you understand this is pi over 2? Everybody understands that pi over 4 is halfway between pi over 2 and 0? So pi over 4, 0 is right here, isn't it? Now, just for the ease of graphing this and not making it too small, let's mark our axis. Notice our y-axis isn't marked with values, is it? So can we go ahead and mark this as like 1, to give ourselves some room? -1, -2. So we've marked the midline, haven't we? From there, we said we go up A and down A and mark that. So how much are we going up and how much are we going down? We're going up 0.5, which would be to here, and we're going down 0.5, which would be to here, wouldn't it? Yes, it would. I marked it 2 spaces as 1, so I would have space, rather than it being this teeny tiny little flat one. Now, then we need to count over the period. So we better find the period, hadn't we? So we marked up and down. So now, period. Our period, we have a formula for that. It is 2 pi over the absolute value of B. So 2 pi over B, B is 1, isn't it? So what is my period? 2 pi. 2 pi is how many spaces on this graph? 8. So all I have to do is count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oops, gonna have to add 1, 8. So now I'm going to make my window here. Does that make sense to everybody? Now, I said 2 windows, didn't I? So now instead of going forward 8, I'm going to go backwards 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Go back 8 this way. And make my second window. Making sense? It's a window. Now, I said to mark quarters. Marking quarters is easy if it's in fourths or halves or something because it's 8 spaces. So what's a quarter of 8? So every 2 spaces, I'm just going to make myself a little mark. Okay? Now this is sine. So we said sine does what? What's the pattern for sine? Middle, high, middle, low, middle, right? So I'm going to do a different color here, and I'm going to start at the middle in the beginning. Middle, and every quarter, I'm going to mark it just like my pattern says to. Middle, high, middle, low, middle. And now look, all I have to do is connect the dots in a smooth curve. Is anybody confused as to what I did? This is middle, high, middle, low, middle. And then we just do the pattern backwards if we need to. Middle, low, middle, high, middle. And it goes the same all the way from left to right, right? Now, connect your dots. Ta-da! That's how you graph it. Doesn't seem that bad, does it? Now let's find all the things that it talked about. It said find the domain. What is my domain? All reals. My range, you're going to have to look on your graph for, aren't you? What is the high and what is the low? Go the low to the high. What's the lowest value, y value here? Yep, -1/2. And the highest is +1/2. So there's my range. And actually we include these as brackets because they actually touch those, don't they? What was the amplitude? Amplitude is A, right? So look back at your chart. Look up at your chart. So the amplitude is 1/2. The period we already found, didn't we? So we got that one. Phase shift. Guess what? We found the phase shift when we found the midline, didn't we? Phase shift is C over B, is it not? Didn't we just find that right here? So what is my phase shift? So you're going to find all those things in the process. And vertical shift. Vertical shift you also found when you found the midline. Because the vertical shift is D. So that's here. So what was my vertical shift? 0. And we found everything it asked us to find. How do you feel about this so far? Let's do another couple and make sure we're all feeling good about this. Now let's do a cosine. It says graph cosine of 3 cosine 2x minus pi over 3. All right. So everybody start by listing A, B, C, and D. Do that now. Okay, so what was A?
3.
What's B?
2.
C?
Pi over 3.
D?
0.
All right. So the next thing we need to do is we need to find the midline. Where to start our window. The middle of our window. That's what the midline is the start of the middle of the window, okay? So what's our formula for finding the start of the middle of the window? C over B, D. So what does that become? Some of y'all are going to be confused by the pi over 3 divided by 2. Dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by... So yes, then you can do it in your head, can't you? So it's what? Pi over 6. So pi over 3 divided by 2 is the same as saying pi over 6. And D was what?
0.
Okay, so here's the problem. Do we have any pi over 6s listed on our graph? All right, guys, you've got to be flexible thought-wise. Pi and pi over 2, however, are. Pi, we can write in terms of pi over 6, can't we? What would pi be in terms of over 6? 2 pi would be 12 pi. 6 pi over 6, wouldn't it? So isn't this the same as saying 6 pi over 6? That means pi over 2 would be the same as what? Yes, 3 pi over 6. Which means that to do pi over 6's, I have to do 3 spaces to get to 3 pi over 6 and then 3 more spaces to get there, don't I? So I just do it in thirds. Here's a third, here's a third, here's a third, here's a third. Okay? And then this is going to be a middle again, and this is going to be, so a third, a third, a third, a third. So now I'm in terms of pi over 6's. Is that so hard? Okay, so now all these new tick marks are pi over 6's, aren't they? Now I'm good to go. Because now it says, put my midline where? The window starts at pi over 6, 0, doesn't it? Yes? So my window starts right here. That's pi over 6. How far up do I go? How far down do I go?
0.
Amplitude is what?
Oh, A.
So up how much? Up 3. So up 3 and down 3. Now I got to find the period, don't I? So period. 2 pi over b. 2 pi over b is going to be 2 pi over what?
2.
Which is just what? Okay. Pi. Now we've marked pi over 6's, haven't we? So if we've marked pi over 6's, how many spaces between 0 and pi? 6. It's whatever the denominator is, isn't it? So it's 6. So we just count over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spaces. So my window goes to here, doesn't it? And then I could do another 6 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's another space at 6. I could go to here. We had to switch it to 6's instead of 4's or 2's because the period was in terms of every pi over 6's, wasn't it? Well, the phase shift was. All right, so now we got to mark the middle into quarters, don't we? So let's mark into quarters. I'm going to use red to mark into quarters. Halfway through this window, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So here's my middle, right? And then you just have to do the middle again. So here's the middle again. It'd be halfway between those and halfway between these, wouldn't it? Do you see why I use a different color? There's a lot of marks starting to happen on your paper, isn't there? Middle again will be here. And then halfway between, halfway between.
I messed up my graph. No, I just
Guys, the black marks, the black tick marks were the pi over 6's, right?
Yeah.
So there are 6 tick marks going across there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. So what did I do? I said I got to divide this into quarters, even, I need 4 even chunks between here and here, don't I? So at 3, this is the middle, isn't it? So I said, what's exactly halfway between here and here? It's right here, isn't it? It's not on one of these marks, it's between them. You're going to have to eyeball this sometimes and see. It's right here. And then what's halfway between here and here? Physically halfway between would be here, wouldn't it? Yes. And then I did the same thing again. Okay, the middle was actually on a black mark.
Oh, okay.
But this is halfway between 2 black marks. This is halfway between 2 black marks. Half, half, quarter, 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 quarter. Get it? If you can do that, you can graph these, because now we're graphing what? Cosine? And what's the pattern for cosine? High, middle, low, middle, high. So that's what we're going to start at. So we're going to graph this high, middle, low, middle, high, middle, low, middle, high. And then just connect into a curve. Okay? Now let's list, once we've got our graph done, let's list all of our pieces that we don't have yet. Domain of this thing. Yeah, Getting the feeling it's always going to be all real numbers for sine and cosine?
Yes.
Range. From the minimum to the maximum. What's the min?
-3.
Yep, down here, -3, and the max is at
3.
amplitude. 3. Period, we've already got. Pi. Phase shift. Where did we find the phase shift? We've already done it.
C over B.
C over B, which is there, isn't it? So we know what it is. So it's pi over 6. And then vertical shift is what? Vertical shift is D, which is what?
0.
Okay. And we've now listed all our pieces and parts, haven't we? All right, one more, and then we're going to move on to how do we go the other direction. This has all the different pieces in it, doesn't it? This one even has a vertical shift. Still no big deal. List your A, list your B, list your C, list your D. And I'm going to make you do most of the work on this one, the heavy lifting on this. And yes, just in case you're wondering, that is a negative sign in front, isn't it?
Yep.
So what is A?
-3.
-3. Now, when we're doing amplitude, though, is the amplitude -3?
No, it's 3.
It's just 3, right? Okay. What's B?
2.
What's C? What's D?
1.
Ah. Now I want you to find where the midline, where our window starts at the midline. Find that, please. Did everybody find it?
Yep.
What is it?
Pi over
Pi over 8.
1.
Yep, pi over 8, 1. Now, do we have pi over 8s marked on our graph? Oh!
No.
These are easy, though, because we have pi over 2s and pi over 4s, though, don't we?
Yes.
So pi over 8s are just going to be what? In between the pi over 4s, aren't they? So here's pi over 2, so here's pi over 4, so pi over 8 is, all the pi over 8s are just here, aren't they? So just mark your pi over 8. And then go figure out where the middle of your window starts.
Can you zoom in just a little bit? Yes. Thank you.
I can only imagine how we would do this.
Oh yeah.
Or with that smaller species?
Oh God, it was awful. That's why I begged for this one. Thank you, Dr. Douglas. All right, so did you mark where your window begins? That's the big thing. It begins at pi over 8, 1. So where is pi over 8, 1 going to be on your graph? First tick and... So my window starts right here. I usually do my window a different color so I don't get mistaken. All right, so that's where the middle of my window starts, isn't it? Now I want you to mark your amplitude. Mark the first part. Go up for your window, down for your window. What's the amplitude, guys?
3.
So -3, which means the amplitude is really what?
3.
So how far are you going to go up and how far are you going to go down from that little mark right there?
3.
So I usually just draw it. 1, 2, 3, up. 1, 2, 3, down. So there's my window and here's the middle, right? Now, what is my period? Go find the period of this guy. So let's go here. Period. Period is 2 pi over what?
2.
Which is what? All right, we're in eighths. So how many eighths make up a pi? Okay, So how many spaces these little tick marks am I can count before I mark?
8.
So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Is it right after pi?
Yep. If it's one space after 0, wouldn't it be one space after pi? Think about it. Now we got to go 8 more. But we can't go forward, so what are we going to do instead? Go backwards, so we just need to mark them here. So this time it'll be one space before, won't it?
Yes.
I'm telling you, this really isn't that bad once you get used to it. Now, I'm going to mark the middle. I'm going to mark my midline since it's not at the axis. Yes?
Why did we not go forward on this one, but on the last one?
Because I want you to get used to doing it either way. You could have gone forward, but since we don't have an extra space, wouldn't it be more accurate to go backwards?
I just thought like
No.
y'all meant to like as a reason we couldn't go.
No. Just that you have the option of going backwards and staying on your graph rather than extending past your graph, because sometimes it's really big far past your graph. And so what you need to do is go backwards instead. All right, so now we need to mark into what? Quarters. How many spaces do we have in that window? 8. So every what?
2.
Every 2 along the midline, not along the axis, along the midline. So every 2 spaces we make a mark. Now, sign usually does what? Midline. But what do I need to take into consideration? I need to take this negative into consideration, which means that this is going to become what instead? So now we can mark it. Starting at the beginning of the first window, middle, low, middle, high, middle, low, middle, high, middle. What is the domain?
All real numbers.
What's the range this time, though?
No 4.
All right, amplitude. Good. Nobody said negative. Period, we already found. Phase shift.
Pi over 8.
Good. Vertical shift.
1.
Ta-da. Y'all can do this. Y'all can do this. This is as hard as it gets right there.
So the phase shift and the vertical shift is just looking at the
Where the midline starts. Where the start of the window for the midline is. Yes, that gives you both of them. That's why I went ahead and told you to mark that, because if we find it, we've already got those things.
we're really only looking for the domain range.
Yeah, everything else is pretty much you've already found. Yeah. You had to draw the window, didn't you? As complicated as it gets. Oh, sure. All right. I don't know that we need an extra one. So let's move on to how do we write an equation? How do we go backwards? What if we've got the graph and now we need to write the equation? You're going to find whether it's sine or cosine. You're going to determine whether it's sine or cosine. In other words, is where it's starting closest to 0, is it starting high, is it starting low, or is it starting at the middle? Sine starts where? Midline, right? And cosine either starts what? High or low if it's negative, right? So we want to find the amplitude, the period, the phase shift, and the vertical shift from the graph for the amplitude, we want to draw in the midline. In other words, you're going to draw in your window. Notice the first thing it said was draw in your window. In other words, if you're starting at the midline, you want to draw up to the peak, down to the valley, right? And go until you start all over the pattern all over again. Once you get that window in, all the rest of this is going to fall out, isn't it? Because if you've got the window, you know the period. You also know the amplitude, don't you? Because you can check from the midline to the high, or the midline to the low. You can figure out the phase shift by figuring out how far away from 0 it is and how far away that midline is from vertical shift is from the x-axis. All of those things are going to pop right out. And once you have those, you have A, B, C, and D. Or you can at least get them. So, draw the midline and count from there to the max or the min. Doesn't matter which one. Otherwise, count from the max to the min and divide by 2. In other words, if we go the whole way from max to min, we can just divide it in half, and that gives us from the midline, doesn't it? It's whatever's up to you. For the period, count either from the max to the max or min to min. And this needs to be in radians, right? For the phase shift, you're going to count sideways from 0 to the start of your window horizontally. And for the vertical shift, you're going to count from 0 to your midline vertically. And that's going to give you both of those, okay? And remember, your phase shift, whatever you count your phase shift, is equal to what? C over B? And when you find your vertical shift, that is D. So once you have the amplitude, it's A, right? Amplitude is A. Period is 2 pi over B, so we could find B. Phase shift, then we can plug in the phase shift in B, and we found C. And then once we have the vertical shift, we have D. And we can just take A, B, C, and D and plug them straight into the formula. Use the formula. Y equals A sine BX minus C plus D, or cosine. Okay? So let's try one. This is really not that hard. If you're given the graph, you just really have to find the window. Figure out where the window is. Here we go. Now, what if they give me all of this information? I don't even have to have a window. They gave me amplitude, period, phase shift, and vertical shift. Guess what they've given me? A, right? They've given me D. And B and C are in the period and phase shift, aren't they? So start with the period. So they said the period is 4. So 4 is equal to 2 pi over what? B. Cross multiply and we get what? 4B equals, and now we just divide by and reduce, and B is what? Pi over 2. Cool. Phase shift. Phase shift is equal to C over B, isn't it? The phase shift is 1/2. We don't know C, but we do know B. And again, all we have to do is cross multiply. So if we cross multiply, don't we get 1/2 times pi over 2? So what is C? What is my phase shift? What is C for this? Pi over 4. And we already have D, don't we? Now, if it doesn't tell you which one you want to do, then guess what? You can pick which one. Let's do sine, okay? So this would be sine. Actually, it would be A sine, wouldn't it? So A sine BX minus C plus D becomes what? What's A? 2. Sine of B was what? So it becomes pi over 2x minus plus, that's it. Now, what if they give us the graph instead? You just got to pick where the graph is, where you want to start. Let's draw the midline in first. Where's the midline going to be on this? Where's the middle between the bottom and the top? It's at 1, isn't it? So midline's going to be right here. So do you want this to start at the midline or you want it to start high? It doesn't matter. You want it to start at 0? Okay. All right. So he wants it to start low. And then we need to go to where it goes low again, don't we? Yes?
Yes.
So we're going to draw our window in right here. Okay. So the first thing we need to do is find our amplitude. Our amplitude is what?
2.
Our amplitude is 2. Okay. Now, we need to find the period. Period is 180 degrees, isn't it? What is equivalent in radians to 180 degrees? Pi, right? So our period is pi. Now, we know the period is equal to what? 2 pi over b, right? So pi is equal to 2 pi over b. So cross multiply and we get pi b equals 2 pi, don't we? Divide both sides by pi, it goes away, so what was b? All right, so now we got b. We got a, because amplitude is a, isn't it? Except for one thing. What do we got to put in front of that a? This thing started low.
Negative.
So it's negative. And if it starts low, is it sine or cosine? It's cosine, isn't it? If this thing starts low, this is cosine. As a matter of fact, it's negative cosine, isn't it? All right, so now, phase shift. Where is this thing normally supposed to start? At 0, right? Does it start at 0? Yeah. What is this point right here? Tell me what that point is right there. That is the point. That's the middle of the start of our window, isn't it? That is the point 0, 1, isn't it? So this now becomes C over B, and this is what? D. So if we mark where the middle, if we mark our window, then we can mark the middle of our window, can't we? So C over B is equal to 0. Does it matter what B is? So we could say C over 2 equals 0. So what is C? Cross multiplied 0, isn't it? And D is 1. So guys, do you see we have A, B, C, and D now? So guess what? All we need to do is write the equation. Y equals negative 2 cosine of what? Minus 0. So do we even put that in? And then what? And that's it. Do you see how drawn that window is the big important thing? So in that window, you know the middle of the midline is your C over B, D. You know this right here is going to be your period, right? And you know this right here from here to here is going to be your amplitude A. It's not hard once you get the window. You pop out A, B, C, and D and then shove them in the picture. This is easier than graphing them, I think. Don't you agree? All right. I think the bell's about to ring, so we'll save applications for next time. You do have homework over the weekend. Any of them that are not application problems. Any of them that are just straight up either graph or draw the graph or match the graph to the equation, those you got to do, okay? So take a look. I think the only ones that means you don't have to do is 20 and 21.
Oh, wow.
And that's it. Okay? Is everybody good? It's not that bad. All right.
You don't have to do that.
You don't have to do that.
What's today's date? 12?
Right up there on the board. Yep. The 12th. I will see you guys again on Tuesday. Remember, Monday is a day off. Don't be that kid who comes to school and goes, where is everybody?
You know, I've never done that.
I've actually seen kids show up early forget after Christmas break, show up the day the teachers came back?
This is our last break until spring.
I know. No, you guys have one more.
No.
You guys have
we have
virtual day.
That's virtual.
That's
Christmas is
like
like,
virtual. Be for real.
it's like out of school and not.
Out of school, but not really. Yeah, but you just have to do a little bit of work and then you're free for the rest of the day. I have to be here. But yes, it's the last break until spring break. It's a long stretch. You know what though? It's gonna go real fast. Yeah, hey, don't forget to turn in don't forget to turn in ACT 52. And I got ACT 51 for you.
Oh, I forgot she was bragging for accuracy.
Yes, I did.
No, please.
Can I turn it in?
Yeah, you keep that, girl.
Wait,
I'm not going to be
You're
here
right.
for
A gift
Tuesday
from me to you.
because of a band.
Right.
So if I'm
Merry
supposed to
Christmas.
change it in Thursday.
You can turn that
You
me,
do for
Caleb.
the common assessment? Yes. Madison,
Hello?
Hannah,
No.
Bridget,
I'll get your tennis tomorrow. I don't really
Kaya,
Oh, no, please.
Are they bad?
Carlos,
Yeah.
Julian, Bryant, who's yours? Bryant got a 6 out of 6. He can tell you all the right answers were. Carlos, Caleb got a 5 out of 6, so that was pretty good. Bridget,
What you get?
I.
Yeah.
If you're not sure what the answers were, number 1 was D,
I don't even want to know.
2 was
Don't
A,
even tell me.
3 was C,
That's embarrassing.
4 was B, 5 was D, and 6 was E.
I
I bet you wouldn't get E wrong now. Bye.
Everybody 2 out of 6.
I don't know what I got. Well, the one we just turned in?
GG's.
GG's.
Look it off. That's just like rude.
You know, just put that into Power School as a whole.